Chapter 20, Knowing what to do after submitting your application. In this chapter, moving to cloud-based storage for 24/7 accessibility on your devices. Remembering to share documents and information with stakeholders. Maintaining connections with funders. You clicked the submit button, but you're not done yet. Now you have to face a number of cleanup questions. How can you store these documents where you will have access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the event a problem arises and you need to view the submitted application document and submit a clarification or a missing attachment? In this chapter, I show you how to deal with all the housekeeping issues you need to take care of after you submit a grant application. Keeping accessible copies of electronic files. You have multiple options for storing your electronic files. Using cloud-based storage services is more secure than printing out your notes and other documents and putting them in a file for later reference. Cloud-based services are encrypted and easy to access from any of your mobile devices. Some are free up to a maximum storage level. After that, there's a small fee, which varies from provider to provider. I've used each of these cloud-based storage options for electronic files, and all are compatible with both PCs and Macs. Dropbox, www.dropbox.com. I like the folder sharing options of this service and the feature that allows me to see when one of my clients is accessing a shared project folder to retrieve or deposit information. A small window pops up on the lower right corner of my computer screen to give me the heads up on any actions in the folder. Google Drive, http://drive.google.com. This service has file storage and synchronization capabilities. Documents can be shared, and Google Drive has collaborative editing options. You need a Google account to use this service, but signing up is free. OnHub, www.onhub.com. After you subscribe to this collaborative file-sharing cloud-based storage service, you can add on a HUD sync to your desktop and keep all your files handy. There is also a mobile application to add and view files away from your office or home. Microsoft OneDrive, http://onodrive.live.com. I use this service on my Windows-equipped computers. It works the same as Dropbox and Google Drive. Note: new cloud-based storage services are emerging on a regular basis, so keep checking to see what's out there and what best fits your needs. Staying connected to your stakeholders. Remember, before you write to grant requests, you should convene your staff, volunteers, community partners, and other interested parties to help your organization develop the plan of action, covered in Chapter 16, and provide the information for the Statement of Need. See Chapter 15. If you need more information, Chapter 10 covers your work with stakeholders and how to involve them in the planning phase of your grant proposals. After you turn in your grant requests, you need to bring the stakeholders back together for a debriefing in which you pass on the key information in the following sections. Providing updates on what's been completed and what to expect next. A few days after the grant application deadline, send thank you notes electronically or in paper to your key partners. Concurrently, schedule a debriefing conference call or face-to-face meeting online or in your office with your program-level staff, board members, community partners, and any advisory board members who are involved in the planning process of developing the grant application's focus. Follow these debriefing steps, review the group's efforts and explain how the information they contributed in the grant planning meetings was included in the final grant application. Give each person or agency a complete electronic and/or paper copy of the final grant request. Redact any personnel salaries before distributing. This can be done easily within Adobe Acrobat Pro, which you should have installed for grant work anyway. Answer questions and propose some what-if questions to find out whether the stakeholders understand their roles and responsibilities if and when the grant application is funded. Consider asking the following questions, in addition to others appropriate for your project. What if we're funded for less than we ask for? What if we're not funded at all? What if the needs of our constituents change before we're funded? Provide a general overview of the process from here and when the funder will make a decision. Even though you may have worked as a group when putting together the narrative information, people present at the debriefing meeting may not have been present at the meeting for the document's final draft review, where your stakeholders were given a chance to critique and/or approve the final document for submission to funders. Some feelings may be hurt when a writing contributor sees massive changes in the final document. Remind anyone who seems upset of the ultimate goal, to get funded and help a segment of the community. Keeping your partners in the information loop. Give your collaborative partners a list of the funding sources and contact people. Someone on your team may know a foundation trustee or a corporate giving officer personally. And sometimes a simple telephone call or an email to a connected friend can make the difference between getting funded and not getting funded. Share other critical information with your partners, too, such as the following: timelines for funder decisions. A master list of partners with contact information. Make sure that you have clearance from all partners before distributing their information. Other projects or programs your organization is planning. This info opens the door for future partnering opportunities. What can partners do for you as a result of the sharing process? They can commit seed monies to begin program implementation on a small scale. Partners who know your needs can unexpectedly make donations of needed equipment, program space, or other items and services. Partners can also give you leads on other funding sources for the project. They can also recommend an internal staff person or an affiliate colleague for your board of directors. Always strive for increased involvement from the team leaders at your partnering organizations. Tracking the status of your submitted application. You submitted your grant application. You know the funder received it, but you don't know whether anyone has actually looked at it yet or how to find that out. This section gives you the post-submission protocol of when and whom to call to check on your application status and when to just chill out and wait for notification. The rules are different based on the type of funding source, so the next sections look at each type individually. Remember, if you are a freelance grant writer, the tracking process is the client's responsibility. The waiting is the hardest part. How much patience do you need to have when you're waiting for communication from a funding source? It depends on the funding source. Federal, expect to wait 3 to 8 months from the date you turn in the requests. The length of time between when you submit the grant application and when the funder decides on funding varies from agency to agency. If you submitted your application in the spring, expect it to be funded no later than the 30th of September, the end of the federal fiscal year. State, expect to wait up to 9 months from the date of submission. Some state agencies have rather quick turnarounds on decision-making, while others take much longer. Foundation, expect to wait a minimum of 3 to 6 months and as long as 18 months from the date of submission. Corporate, expect to wait a minimum of 3 to 6 months from the date the request was submitted, requesting that elected officials track your application's progress. As soon as you send your grant application off to a state funding agency or upload it via a federal e-grant portal, start the tracking process. Now's the time to use those great political contacts you've made in your state capital and in Washington, D.C. Head to Chapter 4 for guidance on alerting your elected officials to your needs. Because the money you're requesting comes from public funds, keep these political dos and don'ts in mind. Do email a copy of the abstract or executive summary along with the Form 424A and the GrantsGov Application Control Center number to your elected officials. Do email the funding agency head, state or federal, any letters of support from elected officials that were written too late to submit with your grant application. Often, your elected officials' offices will email their letters of support directly to the Secretary of the Federal Funding Agency, a cabinet appointee appointed by the President and approved by Congress. Do email or call your senators or representatives local in Washington, D.C., offices to remind them that you need their assistance in tracking the grant application. Don't scream at or threaten elected officials. You really need their influence to help you get this and future grants funded. Don't count on getting your grant funded just because you ask your elected officials to get involved in the tracking process. Using the elected official tracking process helps, but it does not guarantee a grant award. You get a grant award notification. At the state level, you receive a funding award letter or email when your project is selected for funding. Monies are transferred electronically into your organization's bank account. Some monies are awarded and transferred in advance, other monies are released on a reimbursement basis. At the federal level, you may receive a telephone call or email from one of your elected officials in Washington, D.C., who notifies you of your funding award and issues the official press release to your local newspaper. If your official doesn't contact you, you can expect to receive an email from the Office of Management and Budget, known as the OM. In some instances, the press release from elected officials is published before the grant applicant organization has been notified by the feds. If you agree to a lesser amount, you need to rewrite your goals, objectives, and timelines to match the reduced funding. Here's my logic: if you're going to receive less grant money, your promised program design, goals, objectives, and timelines shouldn't remain at the same level as a fully funded program. Reduce your promises by serving fewer members of the target population. Decrease your objectives to take the heat off of having to hit 80% or higher. Do less with less, that's the rule. See Chapter 16 for details on setting up goals, objectives, and timelines. You receive a standard form rejection email or letter. At both the state and federal levels, you receive a rejection letter when your project is denied funding. No call, no advance warning, just a cold, very disappointing rejection letter or email. If you're not funded, request a copy of the peer reviewer's comments using the language of the Freedom of Information Act, the law that entitles you to such public information. Some federal agencies send you the peer review results automatically. In other instances, you may have to call a federal program officer to request the peer review comments. If you don't receive these comments within 90 days of receiving your rejection notice, use the Freedom of Information Act to request them. And don't forget to check out Chapter 21 for more on what to do after your grant request gets denied. For full details and advice on how to make a Freedom of Information Act requests, visit www.foia.gov. Following up on foundation and corporate grant requests. Some foundation and corporate funders use their websites to post information on procedures for grant proposal awards and declines. If you can't locate the funder's guidelines, it's okay to email or call the funder for more information on your funding application status. However, wait 3 to 6 months after your submission date to make this call or to send an email, because the board of directors for these private sector funders often don't meet monthly and often have a lot on the agenda to cover when they do meet. This meeting schedule often delays the grant funding announcements. These funders want you to be involved in the process that eventually leads to either your success or your failure. Communicating with funders is a key to getting your project or program funded, and if not this project, the next one. You can expect major, large, foundation and corporate funders to notify you that the status of your request is pending. Your request has been rejected for funding. Your request has been awarded funding. Note: of all funding sources, corporate funders and smaller foundations, fewer than 5 on the staff, are the most likely to fail to notify you when your grant request is rejected. 50% of the time, communication from a corporate funder or small foundation means you have a check in the mail. Round 1, determining whether your request is under review. When you submit a foundation or corporate grant application, you may soon receive an email letting you know your application has been received. For example, you may receive something that sounds like the following: "We recently received your request for funding. Our Board of Trustees meets 4 times per year. Our next meeting for your area is scheduled for June. If we need additional information, someone from our office will contact you via email or telephone. After we have had the opportunity to fully review your proposal, you will be advised of the board's decision." A response like this one means you're in the running for the money. Don't call this funder, someone will let you know when it has a decision. The least desired communication from a funder tells you that your grant application was received and that the funder isn't considering it for a grant or other type of funding award. Here's an example: your recently submitted grant proposal was reviewed by our program staff and then forwarded to our board of directors. The board met on the 1st of December and reviewed over 200 grant proposals seeking foundation funding. Regretfully, your grant proposal was not selected by the board for funding consideration. There simply was not enough money to fund every great funding requests. Sometimes, a rejection letter comes with a further stipulation that you not submit another grant request for at least 1 year. This is a standard funder policy. Most corporate and foundation rejection letters are sent to you within 90 to 120 days of the funder's receipt of your grant requests. Round 2, finding out whether you're funded. After your first positive communication from the funder indicating that your request is under review, expect a letter within several months. Some come in 90 days, other funders can take up to 18 months. That tells you the outcome of the funder's review. The most desired letter from a funder included information on the amount of your funding award and how to begin the process of transferring funds. Consider this example: the board of directors for the Maybe Foundation met on the 31st of October to review your grant proposal. I'm pleased to notify you that the board is awarding $15,000 to your Youth Development Leadership Camp. We ask that the money be spent exclusively to ensure that the goals and objectives of your project will be achieved. The grant will be paid to you in one lump sum payment, and processing will begin as soon as the grant agreement is signed and returned to us. On behalf of the board, I wish you every success. Many foundation and corporate funders, as well as state and federal funders, require that grant agreements, contracts signed by the grantee and the grantor indicating that you'll spend the money as promised in your funding request, be in place before the funder releases the money. This step is standard procedure. Failing to sign a grant agreement means no grant. However, always have your legal department or attorney examine the language before you sign on the dotted line as a precaution. Call the funder if you have questions. The least desired letter, however, is a rejection letter stating that although your proposal was recommended for funding, no funds are available in this fiscal year to fund your project. The preceding section shows an example of a typical rejection letter, for an application that wasn't even considered for funding. Read on to find out how to proceed after you've been rejected. Round 3, following up after a rejection. When your project is denied funding by a foundation or corporate funder, your options for what to do next are similar to your options when dealing with a state or federal funding agency. See you receive a standard form rejection email or letter earlier in this chapter. First, contact the funder to determine why your grant proposal was rejected. Then ask for a face-to-face meeting if the funder is located within driving distance. If meeting in person isn't a viable option, ask for the best time to discuss the weaknesses in your funding request with our program officer over the phone. This step gives you the opportunity to learn from the experience and to evaluate whether to attempt another submission the following year. When you consider the time spent researching and writing your grant proposal, you owe it to yourself to find out why you failed. You can't correct narrative weaknesses based on the feedback from a standard form rejection letter or notice. You have to talk to a real person. Never become argumentative with a foundation or corporate funder about your grant proposal's rejection. After all, you may want to submit another grant proposal to the funder in the future. Remember to say thank you for all feedback.